I think using the scriptures as the rebuttal towards same-sex relationships, to me, I don't see how that makes sense. You'll often hear, and I've heard this thrown in my face all of my life, the Levitical Code in the Old Testament talks about Sodom and Gomorrah and the evils of what's implied to be homosexuality. I don't know if we know exactly for sure if it's referring to homosexuality or if there were some other grievances or perceived grievances that were going on in that era that had nothing to do with homosexuality. So that's speculative from my perspective. But let's say, for example, that the Levitical Code was specifically talking about homosexuality. The Levitical Code also calls for us to put adulterers to death. It also justifies slavery. It also justifies racism and marrying off our 13-year-old daughters. There are a lot of things that were fulfilled in the law of Moses through Jesus Christ fulfilling those, as we believe as Christians, when he came in the New Testament. So it seems like people who use the scriptures as a rebuttal to homosexuality, it just seems awfully convenient to me, because we seem to pick and choose pieces and nuggets from the Bible that we're going to adhere to and that we're not going to adhere to. So until we start executing adulterers and people having affairs, and until we re-legalize slavery and work towards a more racist society, I just don't think there's any congruence in using scriptures to throw that in the face of a homosexual. What's interesting to me...
What about the New Testament?
So the New Testament, what's interesting to me in the New Testament is, if homosexuality was truly the demise of modern-day society, and this awful, abominable, horrid thing, I guess I thought Jesus probably would have mentioned it, and he didn't. And I don't think you could even speculate or perpetuate anything that's canonized that Christ spoke that had any reference to homosexuality. You also, if you want to look at this from a Mormon perspective, so if we look at the Book of Mormon, which in Mormon doctrine is proclaimed to be the truest book on the face of the earth, again, if homosexuality is such a threat to our modern day society, and the Book of Mormon calls us to attention on many threats, specifically to be aware of in the last days, why was homosexuality not called out and specifically named as one of those horrible demises in society?
It's not mentioned in the Book of Mormon?
It's not mentioned in the Book of Mormon. As far as I've read, and I haven't heard anyone ever use a Book of Mormon passage to refute specifically homosexuality.
Okay, but we've got the words of Spencer W. Kimball and Joseph Fielding Smith and Joseph F. Smith. I mean, that's what modern prophets are for, because, you know, it's more of a modern issue. So that's all we need is Spencer W. Kimball, and that's why we have modern prophets, right?
I think that's where it does become a very difficult conversation to have in an LDS context, because there have been statements made from church leaders about homosexuality. What's been interesting over time is these statements have evolved, and they've evolved in a very positive way.
How did they start out, and where are they now?
I think if you pick up, for example, the Miracle of Forgiveness, that's a book that's pretty tough on homosexuality, and I think the church's approach today is not that harsh. So I think we've softened our approach. I think it's evolved more towards more tolerance, more love. There still is the establishment by modern-day prophets that the act of homosexuality is wrong and that gay marriage is wrong, and I think that makes it difficult to talk about this issue more openly. I think that the granting of blacks the priesthood in the 70s and the issue of homosexuality are are very pressing social issues of our times. I think the blacks in the priesthood was a pressing social issue that was dealt with. And I think that homosexuality is going to be a continued pressing issue that is going to ultimately, I think, have to be dealt with. I think that society is becoming more accepting of homosexuals, and I think that that's going to continue to progress.